Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you for coming to the best session of the whole program again. You will see how best it is. So today, another missile was launched from North Korea, flying over the Japan territory. So we'll talk about that. But Japan is hot in many ways, not only the missile issues. So Japan's economy is actually one of the fastest growing economy among G7s so far. So we'll talk about that and the future of Japan and the investment opportunity in my country. I'm chairing Japan session 3 times in a row here in Singapore and 3 times in a row over there in Los Angeles. That means this is my 6th time to chair the Japan session. So Japan's beauty is always improving incrementally. So the Japan panel in Milken Institute is also the same. So yes, we used to have a best Japan session, but getting better and better every year. And this is the better and the best session and with best panelists. So I have a privilege to introduce my fellow panelists. And a very good mix, diversity, gender, generation. I can't say, but yes, maybe, I'm not sure. And also industry-wise. So let me introduce my fellow panelist. Keiko Tashiro-san is the most highly respected and most highly promoted female boss in Japan's financial circle. And he's executive managing director. She is, yeah, my English is still
you
lower
did the
than,
same mistake last year, too.
Yes. I have to fix that. So Japanese language is getting incrementally getting better. So. She is managing director of the Daiwa Group. That's one of the largest investment bank group in Japan. And she's now in Tokyo. She used to be in United States as well. She graduated from US university like Stanford. So next to Tashiro-san is Shibata-san. Shibata-san, if you don't know Shibata-san in Japan, you are not allowed in the finance in Japan. So Shibata-san used to be a president of the Nomura, the biggest investment bank. And she's now leading Nikko Asset Management. Nikko Asset Management is one of the largest asset management company in Japan. And he also graduated from the good business school like Harvard, Stanford, Harvard. Then, so one female big boss, one legend, and one very promising rising star, Daisuke Iwasa-san. He is the very well-known startup entrepreneur in Japan in the area of the fintech. He set up a company almost 10 years ago. It's an online insurance company, and it's IPO'd several years ago, and it's keep growing. And he's also from Harvard. So 2 Harvard MBA, one Stanford MBA. So allow me to introduce myself with my humble suits. I'm Kotaro Tamura. I'm an Asia Fellow at Milken Institute. I'm a professor at NUS, Lee Kuan Yew School, teaching geopolitics in the region. And I used to be a politician. I used to be a Parliamentary Secretary of Cabinet Office in charge of fiscal and economic policy making under the Prime Minister Abe, very fast government of him. And my family business is one of the largest business suits supplier in Japan. If you like my business suits, so you are people with money, so I give you a double price. So I want to change the order of the discussion a little bit because we have missile launch issues this morning. So I want you to talk about your insights about the North Korean missile launch this morning. Allow me to set a question in this way. Is this beyond your expectation, or you expected this happens? Or what kind of impact this will produce onto Japan or Japanese economy or Asian economy as a whole? Tashiro-san.
So I think the one that we experienced today was expected because of the last one. And I think for us, we won't be surprised if there's more. We just need, I think every one we are more prepared. I think the ones before we got scared because the government told us, go to safety, and we didn't know what go to safety meant. But now we know what we need to do if we get an alert. So I think as we see more, if they're pretty much the same as we are seeing now, we will feel more comfortable because we know what to do to be alert. So I'm not, it will affect us psychologically, but when we get more prepared, it won't scare us as much.
So it's not a surprise to you?
It wasn't a surprise for me.
So you knew that?
I didn't know it. I'm not friends with Mr. Kim, but I wasn't that surprised.
I hope not, but yes.
I wasn't
Maybe nice to have a friend like him, no?
No.
No, okay. Shibata-san, how about you?
I think 3 comments. Politically, it helped to solidify the political support for Prime Minister. So approval rating that went to really 20s, now up to 50s. So Mr. Kim Jong-un is doing his best to solidify neighboring governments. That's number 1. Vis-a-vis stock prices, the Japanese company is doing well. Stock prices don't go up. And actually, there is an element of geopolitical discount being applied to the stock prices. Forget about the rise in the Japanese yen. Well, it's only unwinding of the positions by hedge funds, whose position essentially involved borrowing in the Japanese yen and investing in something else. If they were to reduce the position, then they would have to sort of unwind the position and buy Japanese yen. So it doesn't necessarily show the fundamental sort of trend of the currency. So that's the second comment. Third comment applies to geopolitics. And actually, if you were to be having a friend who lives around the Japanese Air Force bases, US Air Force bases, it's very noisy. And it's been very noisy since April this year. And actually, military buildup is at the sort of substantial level. And if you have to sort of have any friends who's anywhere remotely related to US military, like Australian military people or British military people, they tend to judge that probability of war is actually rising. The key is essentially the fact that the military need to say they're ready, and in order for them to say ready, they need to be ready. Whether or not there will be a political will to embark on a sort of attack, that's outside sort of the military's power. There's one thing certain, that is that any conflict will not involve advancement of ground forces from the south or by the US into the north. And so it is essentially limited to airborne attacks from ground and so sea. And the concept of surgical attack doesn't really apply in that because of the nature of threat of the north to destroy the south, if there is an attack would be very, very massive. China is taking no chances, and actually they have already deployed 150,000 troops across the border. And following UN Security Council resolution, they've increased checkpoints on the road connecting China and North Korea. Unconfirmed rumor is also that China has already completed building a refugee camp. So everyone is getting ready, but one thing that we are certain is that US is not really preparing ground attack. And North Korea is asking for trouble. So it is going to be a very uncomfortable several months.
So basically, you're concerned. So you think this is we should concern this, or?
It's very concerning, right? And actually, I have a habit of counting a number of aircraft carriers in my neighborhood.
You sound like a Japan's defense minister.
No? And also, I do sort of have various guys advising me. Essentially, okay, it's a very early stage of military posturing that is taking place. Military posturing does not equate military attack.
But your very first point you made is very important. So every time he launched missiles, so popularity of the prime minister is coming back. So political stability is back again. Yes, thank you, Shibata-san. So are you concerned?
Yes. So to build on Shibata-san's comment about the relative positive aspect of the recent crisis, I think it has really awoken the Japanese people to the military risk, the reality of the geopolitical risk that we're living in. Prime Minister Abe pushed through changes in set of laws regarding the self-defense force, was it a year ago? And there was a big political debate, mainly opposition coming from the left, who were very, I would say, naive about the risks that are posed to us. So I think, in a way, the recent crisis regarding the Korean Peninsula has really helped push the Japanese people's awareness and will probably push us to become a more pragmatic, and if I may, Japan to become a more normal country that is responsible for its own national security. And another aspect I thought was interesting was I was reading through some of the history of the self-defense force and how the self-defense force was formed. If you look back in the 50s, was after the Second World War, we gave up all military forces and we were occupied by the US forces. But when the Korean War struck up, most of the US military forces had to go to Korea to fight them. Thus, Japan became empty, and there were threats of Russians coming in. Thus, we reorganized the former military people as special police, and it became the self-defense force, which was always a fiction. It was not supposed to be a military force, but de facto, it was all military alumni in the force. So I think it's interesting. History is repeating itself after 60 years. And we are, again, waking up to the realities. And I think in other aspects, too, it is really helping Japan become a more normal country that we should have been much earlier.
So we need to buy your insurance?
Hopefully.
Can I add one thing,
yes,
which
please.
is, while we're in geopolitical, which is a bit different, so you can just go back again,
yes.
is my concern, maybe even more than North Korea, which is not considered that much as earthquakes. Because the possibility of a really gigantic earthquake hitting Japan is a very high possibility. And my concern would be if the rating agencies looks at the companies and where their factories are and factor in the possibility of earthquakes. That is a really big concern for me, which is not discussed, and you can go back again. For me, that is actually a bigger concern than North Korea.
I see. Yes, fair enough. So we come back to this point. But then we want to start from the bright side. So as I have mentioned in the beginning, Japan's economy is the fastest growing economy at least among G7. Our GDP is 5 trillion US amount and growing annualized 4%. That means we are producing one Singapore every year, Singapore economy. So I think that's doing well. So, 57 months consecutive expansion of the economy. Recently released from the Cabinet Office. So I want to hear your comment on this. Is our economy? You feel our economy is keep expanding? Expansion. Time frame is longer than so-called bubble economy 30 years ago. Iwasa-san, when we enjoy the bubble economy, you're not here. So, but how do you feel the current Japanese economy?
So we tend to focus on the headline data, GDP growth, inflation, unemployment rate, etc. But living and working in Japan, I do feel a solid change in society that has happened over the last 5 to 10 years in many aspects. And if I were to pick one that is directly relevant to economic growth, change in corporate governance structure, I really feel that. So many companies have been forced to invite independent board directors. And we have our independent board directors, and I've sat on other companies, public companies' board as an outside director. And that is really starting to have an influence, because before there were no check and balances. So CEOs could just sit on a pile of cash without really thinking about capital efficiency. But now you're starting to see independent directors pushing the CEOs to make a prudent decision about the use of their capital. And we listen to our board directors. When we take things to our agenda to our board, we always think what opinions we would be posed, what points would be challenged by our board directors, and vice versa when I was a board director. So I think that it's a slow change. It does not show up like a GDP growth, quarterly GDP growth number, but I see those kind of changes happening in very many parts of the society that is really solidifying the regrowth of Japan.
So the bottom line of this session is don't underestimate my country. So how many of you are visiting my country? How many of you recently visit my Tokyo or any place? Yes. So you see the booming.
It's still a very well-kept secret. That's why
yes.
this is for us.
It's very hard to book a hotel, very hard to book a very nice restaurant, maybe partially because of the Singaporeans. But so, Tashiro-san, do you feel booming? Japanese economy is changing.
I agree with Iwasa-san that I feel it's changing. But I won't say it's booming. But if you look at the construction area around my office, it's actually booming. But I think the concern that I have is that it's booming for some people, but some people think they're totally isolated from the economy regenerating. And I think that's what needs to be addressed.
How about Shibata-san?
I think I have a few comments to make. Number one, we should start with the job market. And for any one job seeker, now there's 1.51 job offers. And that is something that I have never seen before in recent years. And also, there are a shortage of personnel in the lower end of a value chain. So restaurant owners are having a hard time keeping their staff. And actually, on construction site, a marginal price of employing a construction workers could be 3 times as high as before. It's not that construction workers are making 3 times more money, but with the completion deadline, penalty, and also the commitment for the next construction, construction companies are willing to pay premium. There is also a shortage of truck drivers, and actually marginal price, not regular price, gets around the $70,000. So actually, what we are also seeing is interesting sort of a pressure to wages. It's not been sort of seen before. It's happening at the lower end of food chain, but it's about to sort of start finding its way. So long-awaited healthy inflation may be coming. So that's first comment to make. Second comment to make is that the answer of Japanese companies to the shortage of labor is essentially automation. So actually, if you have to take a look at the companies who are very good in robotics, sensors, virtual reality, their stock prices are doing very, very, very good. It's only that the Nikkei 225 consists of many 85-year-old trees. And 85-year-old trees don't grow. So don't get fooled by looking at the index. But actually, differentiation has never been more important than before. So we are, the way in which we are approaching investors is saying that, okay, traffic is crowded. Highway is crowded. Why don't we find fast lanes? And there are fast lanes. We are bullish about Sony. We are bullish about Daifuku. We are bullish about the Recruit for all those reasons. And actually, there's a new economy that is growing in Japan, and they can apply the same technology to other companies. So there are sort of pockets of Japanese economy that would grow very fast, like the way in which Chinese economy is divided between old and the sort of new economies. Governance, very important, and actually we are devising a strategy to invest in poorly governed companies, of course, as a universe, and then sort of do lots and lots of engagement. And actually, we have a record and data, for the past 3 years of having active dialogue with 500 companies in Japan, and we are the only ones who are doing it. And there is a value to be made. More work to be done. But actually, days on which corporate executives could essentially sleep on their desk is over.
Quickly, please. We are moving.
So another comment I wanted to make was related to labor workforce. And I think one of the biggest changes over the last 5-10 years is a higher participation of female in the labor force. So I think we used to have the non-working moms as a majority, but over the last 10 years, that has flipped, as with any other developing country. And together with it, the culture and norm has been formed that fathers should be more responsible for taking care of their kids. And that's become a big cultural change. And then I think another is, I think we've been becoming more and more used to seeing foreigners in our society. So in addition to the 24 million tourists we had, which was 20% increase year over year, in Tokyo, when you go to the convenience stores, you see mostly international people working on the cashier. So I think those changes would really help address the shortage, the workforce shortage issue too.
So you touch upon very important points. So since yesterday, we are talking a lot about aging and population shrinkage, not only focusing in Japan, but the world, especially advanced economy. So Asia is still have a benefit of increasing population and young population bonus. But Japan is, in a way, front runner, can be said like a front runner of the shrinking population, the aging population. So I think government and private sectors and the local government, local economy as well, tackling these issues. Can you say something about, the Japan's role, or Japan is kind of ahead, tackling with population of aging and decreasing populations, and
I could.
Yes.
So I think up to now, companies and for in Japan as well as for most global companies, there've been lots of ways to take care of. There's maternity leave, paternity leave, how to take care of your kids. But now corporations in Japan are forced to accommodate how people take care of their parents. So elderly care leave, it's a totally different than taking care of children, because children grow up and then they leave, as opposed to parents. They sort of decline, and you don't know when it's going to end. So I think the ways that companies have to deal with that, Japanese companies are facing it ahead of a lot of other companies, and we can sort of share that.
Okay.
So we tend to think technology is for the youth, but I think the incremental value created is when technology is applied to the elderly. So I have an interesting anecdote. We tried to introduce using iPads for internal executive meetings to get rid of paper. Initially, my experienced colleagues in their 60s objected, but once they started using it, they were happy because they could enlarge the text, which they couldn't see in the paper forms. So that's just one example, but I think so using technology to increase the efficiency in the elderly nursing homes. There's lots of issues there. Many people, so elderly walking around, getting and disappearing, that can be taken care of. Many people are worried about their parents living alone in their homes. That can be addressed through mobile technology as well. AI, intelligence, they could be good partners to spend time talking with the elderly. And also robotics as a form to help the physically demanding work of taking care of the elderly. So I think there are many innovation that is to be made. And if you think about the incremental value that's created, how much value is created through Snapchat that's enhancing the communication of the youth? I think in real terms, there is more value that is created through deploying technology to address the many issues that we will face in the aging society, not just in Japan, but in many other developed countries.
So allow me to touch upon one thing which are not covered by fellow panelists. I want to speak on behalf of the Japanese government. So Japanese government, for the first time since last year, opened the labor market for foreign workers. We don't call it immigration because still allergic to that word, general public is. So we, for the first time, in the special economic zone appointed by government, so they are allowed to take foreign house helpers since last year. And since this year, nurses and caregivers in the scheme called very disguised name, but a technical internship. So but in reality, this is a foreign labor taking. So that's happening for the first time in the area of the service industry. And among service industries, nurses, caregivers. So now Japan's labor market is officially opening. Of course, we are having Olympic Games, and hopefully I will touch upon later the IR, integrated resort. The casino is legalized, so much more building is coming. So construction workers, simple factory workers, but also nurses and caregivers and house helpers are imported already. So that's starting. So government is not saying the target, but maybe more and more foreign labor will come to Japan. Of course, technologies and automations and robot AI will help us. And Japan is the easiest place to implement that because already young population shrinking, so we don't deprive young people's jobs. So, okay, Shibata-san, you have any comment on the aging and the population shrinkage issues? How Japan is doing good or doing not good?
It's a long-term serious issue. We should not really sort of underestimate the impact of having a close to 1/3 population over 65 years old in 2035. 1 in 5 is going to be over 75 years old. Actually, I spent lots of time with the medical doctors in the endeavor to improve the quality of life of elderly. I thought I was making a contribution. Then I realized, I'm talking about myself. So essentially, easy way is to keep elderly active. One way is to keep them on labor force for a longer period of time. Daily exercise is very important. Dementia happens to the people who are less active, less social. So this sort of social movement have started taking place in various places, including Nagano Prefecture, where average, the length of quality of life for elderly is getting longer. So that's number one. I also do have a policy of doing exercise for 2.5 hours a day, and not hard exercise, but it's very helpful. Second, the budget. Actually, 44% of Japanese GDP goes into tax, also social security. And if you have to compare the number with the Europeans, it's low. So the impact essentially will mean that we get closer to European levels of the burden of the nation in order to finance government and the social welfare. Touching upon what Daisuke stated, actually, there is a strong advancement being made by entrepreneurs connecting medical doctors, and in the form of remote medical delivery, it's coming. There is a sort of legalization of certain procedures whereby chronic diseases could be treated over the internet. And also, robotics for now is not sort of RTD2, but it's something that people in the nursing homes do wear. That's in the process. And actually, the GE and others have established a research and development center in Japan to work on sort of medical delivery machines. That is going to be very important because Japan would not really have enough hospital beds in coming years with the aging population. So home medical care is going to be very important. And that also means new businesses. And don't forget that Korea is young now, but it's getting older at the pace faster than Japan and other countries. So there are sort of technologies that people in Asia will be able to benefit from. That's being developed in Japan. And also investors can make money.
So as to the population, interesting solution may be temporarily, at least temporarily. Of course, it's not only for the population, but the most secured industry, I think, is tourism. So I personally, I'm stationed in Singapore, and my family is here, but I personally going back to Japan at least twice a month. So every time I go back, I stay in Tokyo or Osaka. Every time I found difficulty to book hotels, and as I mentioned, good restaurants. So especially Singaporeans, Hongkongese are very good at finding good restaurants. So they are booking ahead of us. So every time I sit in the very fancy restaurant counter, my fellow next neighbor is Singaporeans. So they are speaking very good Japanese, like omakase, please, or something like that. 10% of the Singaporeans keep coming to our country, and Chinese. So 2020, 2030, according to the forecast done by United Nations, 2030, 2 billion travelers happening globally. So Japan's, the visitor to Japan number is 4 times bigger than last 5 years. So Japan, I think, is finally found. And in order to boost that, boost means, number-wise and quality-wise, Japan last year finally legalized casino. And casino implementation law is in discussion, will be in discussion in coming DICE session, and will be passed until the end of this year. So Japan will be building something like Marina Bay Sands, but maybe bigger than that. So I think there's many discussion about IR, addiction to gambling is not good, but we already have pachinko. So pachinko market is the half size of the car industry. And we have boat racing, bicycle racing, motorcycle racing, and betting on soccer lotteries. And we have horse racing cup named under Emperor Cup. So we're gamblers already. So I think we can invite more wealthy high rollers from other parts. Basically, IR is successful in the place which has not so many things. I'm sorry for Singapore, but Singapore is a nice place. But Japan has culture, nature, food, climate. Singapore is a nice place. I like it. So, but different. And Macau, for example. So if we have IR, I think it can boost the tourism and it can be a very big investment. There's many discussion, regarding IR. Can you make comment on IR and tourism possibility of Japan?
So I think tourism is good for Japan in that I think it changed the mentality of Japanese, because for some reason we always had, not just because we're modest, is that we had an inferiority complex someplace in our mind. And I think by getting the tourists to come to Japan, and we understand that actually we have a lot of valuable asset that people want to come and see and share. And I think that impact is very big, psychologically for Japanese. And by building a casino, for me, it's like building an adult Disneyland. And I think people choose to come to Tokyo Disneyland over some other Disneylands for reasons because it's in Japan. And I think for the casinos, if we could build a casino that people come because it's in Japan, not because it's any other casino, it would be good for the country.
Thank you.
I think one comment that I make is that the type and nature of tourists coming to Japan is changing a lot. And probably the impact of a social network should not be underestimated. And in fact, people in Taiwan compare notes about their experience in rural part of Japan. And some of them know much more than I do about certain villages.
That's right.
And
even in my countryside,
right.
hometown.
Social sort of network, and also initially the rise of Chinese tourism was essentially group of buyers, but now it's sort of individuals. So the way in which they would spend money is not in essentially purchases, but in paying money for experiences. So, and again, so SNS actually is very useful, because the Chinese value for travel is a bit different, basically. When I compare trips, I tend to look for short summary. The Chinese tend to look for long story, and it's a sort of building a lifetime experience. So I think the diversity of Japan and its culture, and also diversity of various places, would basically be very useful assets for the people in the nation, in the neighboring nation, to enjoy. And Tokyo is a city with clean water, clean air. And in fact, PM 2.5, the legal limit is 17 micrograms per cubic meters, and that's a far cry from 300 somewhere. So first of all, important to know that Japan is becoming a more mature society and civilized society, in great contrast to pre-war Japan that was essentially go and so get the sort of piece of land. And I think hopefully the experience of travelers in Japan would be helpful to improve the national feelings of the neighboring nations over the next sort of 10, 20 years.
So good for the diplomacy as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Any comment?
So I'd like to highlight the secondary societal effect that all this has on the Japanese people's mentality. So last year it was 20 million travelers. Was it 5 million 5 years ago then? You said it quadrupled, right?
6 million.
6 million, okay. So we're people of a country of 130 million people. Before, for the last 50 years, we've had 5 million people visiting us. Suddenly this number has come up to 20 million, and the government's target is doubling it to 40 million. So imagine what effect that has on the mentality of the Japanese people, that exposure to global citizens, if I may. And you'd be shocked by how domestically contained a lot of the debates are within Japan, something that's unimaginable living in a cosmopolitan society like Singapore. So hopefully, in addition to the direct effects that tourism brings to the economy, I think over time it will really help change the mindset of the Japanese people and help unlock and unleash the potential that we've talked about for a long time.
So the government target of the number of visitors we would like to have used to be 60 million until Tokyo Olympics, but now it's getting down to the 40 million. But 60 million is a lot. In case of China, China's population 1.3 billion. So 10% of the population is now going abroad as a tourist right now. So among that, 10% is coming to Japan. If we build a casino, I think more than that is coming. So Japanese government is now preparing that too much, people coming from one country, is, something. Sometimes it can be too much. So government changed the target to from a number of visitors to the personal consumption per capita. That's why we are having casino. So smaller number of visitors, but larger number of per capita consumption. And high rollers, wealthy people can be a person who can respect our culture, nature, food, and who can study about our country before that, and some discipline together. So, Japan's IR may be a very interesting opportunity in order to boost our economy, and as they have mentioned, to change the mindset of our people in a good way. So, IR is also good. And I want to go coming back to the geopolitical issues, North Korea. So yes, earthquake is also very scary. I think one positive effect of the North Koreans acting like this is Japan-China political relation is getting better. Even China, they seems like they have a difficulty to control this country. The collaboration between two countries, that kind of needs, they finally coming to understand, and the Prime Minister Abe also understand that we need to cooperate more with China, at least for North Korean regions. So recently, Prime Minister Abe made a very phase-changing comment. He said he would like to support One Belt, One Road, and Japan would like to do whatever it takes. If we can cooperate, we can contribute to the One Road, One Belt. So I think Japan is shrinking, aging economy. We have many issues. Structural reform is not 100% yet there, but our luck is the largest, potentially the largest economies in our neighborhood. So China. So I think our live and death is to some extent, to big extent, depend on how we take advantage of the Chinese market, I think. And as I mentioned, North Korea is kind of paving the way for Japan to build a bridge between Japan and China. So, so far, I have a feeling that not so many Japanese companies are doing well in Chinese market. But China is also coming to understand Japanese technology and craftsmanship, and some products at least needed for their needs, and especially our skill set to tackle the aging and the population shrinkage, because they are already having the same issue. So I think utilization of the Chinese market is very, very key for our country. I want to listen to your comment and your suggestions and what's really going on, more than I do. So China, Japan, economic cooperation, and is there any good example, if you can name the company doing well in Chinese market and potential?
So regarding China, it's not just Japan, but the rest of the world is looking for China as consumption, as its people, and technology, everything. So it's not just Japan. We have a lot of competition to get China's attention. One thing that we have to our advantage over some countries is that we are very close geographically close to China. And I think that's where it lies that we, even despite all the technologies that we have to communicate in cyber, I think the face-to-face connection is really, really important. I think this is like, very manual type of talk, but I really, really think that the trust that we can gain together because we're close is going to be very advantageous. And I can't give you any concrete examples because, as you mentioned, 3 or 5 years ago, we had a bad relationship with China. A lot of companies came back. But when they try the next time, I think they're going to try to get the personal relationships, not just because it's a big market. And I think that's what's going to help.
Great.
Actually, the United States is the world's largest economy. China is the second largest economy. And Japan is the third largest economy. And in fact, that basically speaks for the importance of the presence of China from the viewpoint of the United States and also from the viewpoint of Japan. And in fact, when you take a look at what's happening in China, a Chinese economy now, we complain about overcapacity in areas like steel, cement, glass. We started worrying about the rise in the non-performing loans. That's all the economy. New economy is thriving, and it's changing the world. So China is far ahead of Japan in fintech by now. There's no comparison. So what I personally expect is that investment flow would become more mutual as opposed to one way. In the past, it was a Japanese foreign direct investment that kept part of the Chinese economy afloat. And some of the complaints that the Japanese are having is not because of a relationship, but because of shorter life expectancy of enterprises in China. They change a lot at the fast pace. So all the guys would basically be eliminated, and new guys would essentially thrive. So if we were to listen to industries of the past people, then we will be making a huge mistake about the importance of China as a market. And also, probably the Japanese have already discovered that staying there for a long time for the consumer products would basically help. And in fact, with the rise of middle-income population in China, they want to buy more products that's safe and dependable. And the Japanese brand is among many brands that has appeal to the rapidly rising middle-income population. So whether or not we like it or not, the second largest economy and third largest economy of the world need to get closer.
So one area, specific example, maybe in the aging society industries. So I mentioned earlier, so there's a company called Benesse that operates the largest number of senior housing nursing homes across Japan. And they have the expertise of training people and making sure the elderly are well taken care of, maybe similar to, say, hotels operations, hospitality. So as China will start to age rapidly, given the one-child policy, I think Benesse will have lots of opportunities to operate interesting businesses there. So maybe in that part, Japan will play a role. And then somewhat related, I think one positive effect of Donald Trump's isolationist policy is I think Japan is playing another leadership role within the region, especially after the US's withdrawal from the TPP. So in a way, Japan will cooperate with China, but they will also act as a balancer to coordinate within the region to make sure that China complies with the standards that the Western capitalist societies seek for.
Thank you. So Japan used to be known as the powerhouse, innovation powerhouse. As you mentioned, some innovations already happening in the neighborhood, China, and Silicon Valley is taking over that powerhouse role. But still, we have a craftsmanship. We have some technologies. These are investors. So can you talk a little bit about what Japan still have as a technology or innovation?
I think so for Japanese, and everybody who has been in Japan probably knows the looking into the details is something that we're good at and something that we can value. And you can't value something that you don't see. So somebody who's come to Japan understands the intricacy and the details, even in the services and the products. So as more people come to Japan, they see what they're missing. And I think that's really important. That's why it's important to get more people to come to Japan, so they see what we have. And I think as people value what we have, and as I mentioned before, the Japanese people would understand that this is something they have that other people don't have. And we don't understand that right now. So I think that's really important, that we do have more confidence in what we have.
Great.
I think I can sort of
medical check is good, yeah?
Actually, I can sort of point so many sort of hard examples. Number one, Sony's turnaround into the future would depend heavily upon their success in virtual reality. And the quality of Sony's virtual reality is one of the top in the world. E-commerce means logistics. And logistics mean actually warehouse automation. So self-running pellets produced by Daifuku is reducing the cost for many players. And e-commerce depends heavily upon automation of their warehouses. Big data, or actually Recruit is getting deeper and deeper into big data, because they are in the business of connecting patrons with the restaurant. They have a very good the database, and now they have started serving analysis of their client profile to restaurant, and that's also very, very sort of hot. And Japan is also very advanced in the sensor technologies. Okay. Automation requires good sensors. So Keyence is extremely world leader in the automation. And also Japan Ceramics is also very good in sort of sensors. And also condensers. Okay, condensers. This takes a sort of microscope to look at them. And actually, the Murata is very advanced. So actually, there are sort of pockets of example of success that would propel the Japanese economy into the future. What Japan doesn't really have is sort of an integrator like Apple. So Apple is essentially very good in discovering who has the best sort of technology and act as a compiler. But leave that the space for Apple. Society will be more automated going forward. What we call robotics companies will no longer be called robotics companies in 10 years later. It just will be called industrial companies. And Japan is at the forefront in that trend.
Okay, you know a lot. Yeah.
So another change that I've witnessed over the 5-10 years is how much the government is promoting and pushing entrepreneurship. So my favorite story is of an entrepreneur who started a business back in the 80s, and he would say back in those times there were no terms entrepreneurs. The only terms that were there was called datsara, which means drop out from the salaryman's life, which effectively meant you're either starting a yakitori barbecue place or a ramen shop. How much society has changed. So I think that the positive attitude that Abe is taking to really promoting entrepreneurship would hopefully in the midterm have an impact. And I was reminded yesterday, sitting in the session for blockchain, that the inventor or the founder of blockchain or Bitcoin is Satoshi Nakamoto. The true identity is not known, whether he or she is Japanese or not, but at least people have chosen Japanese as the identity of the inventor of the blockchain. It shows there's some respect for Japanese technology and innovation.
Well, actually, just one sentence to add to what Daisuke stated. In the past, graduates of good universities wanted to join big companies. These days, graduates of good universities want to join startups. That is something that we have never seen in the past 30 years.
Thank you. So the last round, so everyone, I give you 1 minute. And can you name any industry or company for them to make a big investment in Japan?
So I can't because I work for a securities company, so I'm not allowed to name any names. But I think we've all covered the areas that we think are very strong in Japan. And I think that, and June mentioned that the government is finally promoting people, Japanese people, to take risks. I feel it from a broker's point of view that they're telling retail investors they need to prepare for retirement. They need to invest in equity. That's never been done before. There's tax incentives being put in place. So I think that will help people, their mentality, take more risks. And if they educate their kids and their children when they're small, take risks, that will change our mentality. And I think that's the #1 most important thing that we need to do.
Thanks so much. Shibata-san, before answering my question, I have a question. So your company is one of the most diversified company in terms of the nationality of the employees. So I think it's starting, it's happening in other companies as well?
Actually, we are very global in nature and also very diversified in gender. Actually, our Singaporean office is mainly run by women, and probably we are far more advanced than sort of many of the Singaporean companies there. We have only about 800 people around the globe, 400 Japanese passport holders, and 400 non-Japanese passport holders, and it's enormous diversity that we are having around the globe. Having stated that, in Tokyo, there are only 400 Japanese passport holders, and there are 100 non-Japanese passport holders. So we are probably the only global headquarters located in Tokyo with the true global diversity. And that basically sort of creates sort of a culture of innovation, the culture of sort of a global scale thinking. So our internal motto is that we would move at the speed of sound by international standard. We would move at the speed of light by Japanese standard.
So Japanese companies are changing because Japanese companies are doing a record high mergers and acquisitions globally. So maybe Japanese companies will get used to that. So
I think there are challenges for them because it's an old U.S. approach of yesteryears that they buy companies and they would end up having many little me's. Little me, a big me in New York, little me in London, little me whatever. And as of now, it's a diversification of their business footprint, but it's not globalization of a headquarters. So they have one more thing to do.
Okay, thank you. So can you spot any place to?
Yes. So there's an interesting, innovative fintech company that's trying to disrupt a very old, mature, big industry called the life insurance industry. So if you're interested, please check out ticker 7157. It's LifeNet. But I think it's really important to not just follow the headline numbers, but really pay attention to the qualitative changes that is happening in the Japanese society, because we really feel that happening, and that will definitely have an impact on the mid to long-term future of Japan. So there's a severe shortage of English media covering Japan, very few journalists in Japan. So I think the amount of information you can get in English about Japan is really limited. So I really do suggest you come over to Japan and listen to the stories, and then you will really understand what's going on.
Thank you. As I mentioned, I think you get convinced. So don't forget us, don't underestimate us. Please come visit us, not only as a tourist or not only as a gambler, but also as an investment professional. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.